You'll sleep near the mops tonight. He tossed the smallest room key into his wife's hand while his mistress stepped into the penthouse elevator. His sister recorded every second. She picked up her suitcase without a word. Then the front desk manager checked one reservation twice. His face went pale, and he hurried through the staff-only door. Nobody in that crowded lobby understood what they had just watched. By the time they did, it would be far too late to undo a single second of it. The man was Kwame Boateng, and he said it loud, loud enough for the bellman to freeze mid-step and the guests by the fountain to turn and pretend they weren't listening. The plastic tag in his wife's palm read Room 6, Sublevel, a room the size of a bathroom down beside the service closet where guests never go, with a folding cot and a pipe that hissed when the boilers woke up. And he wasn't finished. As Adaeze read the tag, he leaned in close and smiled for the crowd. "Don't look so wounded. A woman like you should be grateful anybody booked you a room at all." A ripple of laughter moved through the beautiful people, because that is what beautiful people do when a powerful man gives them permission. Then he said the cruelest thing of the whole night, easy as ordering a drink. "You were always going to end up back with the cleaning staff, Ada. I just stopped pretending before you did." Up above them, the gold elevator doors were sliding shut over Falake's grin, his mistress, riding to the penthouse suite on the 40th floor, wiggling her fingers in a slow little wave. And Kechi, his younger sister, circled with her phone turned sideways, hunting a better angle. "Say something, Ada. Come on, one tear, just one. The family's waiting for it." Ada said nothing. She bent down, wrapped her hand around the handle of her own suitcase, the small one, the one she always packed herself and never handed to a bellman, and she stood back up straight in a lobby of strangers who had just watched a husband set his wife below the pipes. A young bellman stared at his shoes. A woman in a gown by the fountain shook her head and looked away. Nobody stepped in. Nobody ever does. That is the cruel little truth about a public shaming. 100 people will pity you, and not one of them will move. And behind the front desk manager, who had gone so pale, had not been frightened of nothing. He had seen a name attached to that reservation that had no business anywhere near a sub-level cot, a name that turned his hands cold. Whatever it meant, he did not walk to carry the news. He ran. Ada felt the cold weight resting against her collarbone, her mother's key, a small worn thing on an old strip of leather tucked under her blouse where nobody could see it. She pressed her palm flat over it once, the way you hold something to keep it from cracking. Then she pointed her suitcase towards the service stairs and walked down into the belly of the building. On the third landing, she passed a housekeeper hauling a bag of linens up towards the guest floors. The woman was maybe 60, tired in the shoulders, with a name tag that read Ola. She saw a lady in a nice dress dragging a suitcase down the wrong stairs into a part of the hotel guests weren't supposed to find, and she didn't ask a single nosy question. She just stopped, set her bag down, and said, "You lost, baby? These stairs only go down to where we keep the mops and the machines. Ain't nothing down there for a guest." Ada looked at her, really looked at her, the way you look at someone who reminds you of somebody you buried, and said she was fine. She knew exactly where she was going. Ola studied her face a second longer, decided not to push, and pressed a wrapped peppermint into her hand from her apron pocket, the way mothers do. "Well, you need anything, you holler for Ola." Then she picked up her linens and climbed. She had no idea who she'd just been kind to. Ada would not forget it. People who are gentle with you when they think you're nobody are telling you the truth about themselves. The gala rolled on without her. The music swelled again. 2,000 guests filled the grand ballroom of the Meridian Crown, the flagship of the largest hotel chain in the country, gathered here in Atlanta for its grand reopening. Not one of them knew what the manager had seen on his screen. Not one of them, in all that marble and gold, knew the woman with the small suitcase at all. She didn't cry that night, not one tear, no matter how much Nkechi begged for it. That part matters. Hold on to it. A woman doesn't stand that still under that kind of shame by accident. To understand it, we go back, before Atlanta, before the marble floors, before the man who threw her a key like a tip. Adeze grew up on the forgotten side of the city, in a low brick motel that rented rooms by the week to people the world had already decided not to look at. Her mother, Ifua, cleaned those rooms, 12 hours a day, sometimes 14, on knees that never got the chance to heal. Ifua Okonkwo was a maid, and she was the proudest woman little Ada ever knew. "A room tells you everything," her mother used to say, snapping a sheet flat and tucking the corner with 2 sharp folds. "How a person leaves a room tells you who they are when they think nobody's looking, and how you clean one tells God who you are." Ada learned to fold a hospital corner before she learned cursive. She learned that dignity wasn't something you bought, it was something you carried, held close into rooms other people thought were beneath them. And they had almost nothing, a winter when supper was rice and whatever the motel kitchen was throwing out, a month with no heat because fixing it cost more than her mother made in 2 weeks on her knees. Ada lay under 3 coats in the dark, listening to her mother pray, and learned young that the world would never hand anything to women like them. Whatever they got, they would build with their own 2 hands. But her mother had a dream, and she said it out loud so often that it became a kind of song in that cold little room. One day, she'd whisper, "Somebody's gonna build the kind of house that never puts a person near the mops, a place where the woman scrubbing the floor gets treated as good as the woman sleeping up on silk sheets. You hear me, baby? Somebody's gonna build a house like that in this world. Might as well be you." The night her mother died, worn all the way out at 51, in a crowded county hospital ward with a curtain for a wall, she pressed something small into Ada's hand and folded the girl's fingers closed over it. It was a key, brass, worn smooth at every edge, hanging from a strip of cracked leather. "That opens the first room I ever cleaned, room 1 at the old place, 40 years back. They let me keep it when they tore the wing down. It's the only thing I ever owned outright, that no landlord and no boss and no man could take off me." She squeezed as hard as she had left to squeeze. "So build the house, Ada, and when you build it, you treat every soul who walks in like they're the very first room. Promise me?" Ada was 19. She had a diploma, $200 in a coffee can, and her mother's key. She wore that key every single day for the next 22 years, through the overnight clerk shifts, the classes she paid for 1 credit at a time, the reckless morning she bought a failing hotel for almost nothing and signed the papers with a shaking hand, betting everything she had on a building everyone else had written off. She built the way her mother taught her to fold a corner, careful, square, 1 room at a time. It nearly broke her more than once. One night, that first hotel flooded after a pipe burst in a January freeze. 9 guests, nothing left for a contractor, a bank hunting for a reason to take the place back. She went up at 2 in the morning in rubber boots, hauled water in buckets until her arms shook, then moved every guest to a dry room by hand, carrying their bags, saying each name. Not one of them knew the owner was the woman who'd just mocked their hallway. 3 became regulars for 15 years. That was the secret her competitors never understood. She didn't treat the work as beneath her because her mother had taught her nothing honest ever was. And slowly, impossibly, the buildings began to add up. She learned the harder lesson too, the one about people. A guest once screamed at her over a billing mistake that wasn't hers, called her stupid and worse, and threw her a key at her face. She refunded him and wished him a good night, but she never forgot the shape of that cruelty, the way a small man reaches for the cheapest weapon he can find the second he feels powerful over you. Years later, she would see that exact same shape again, in her own living room, in the voice of the man she'd married. What she built after that, she built quietly, under a plain company name that gave nothing away. A name no gossip writer ever tied to a poor girl from a weekly rental motel. How far it reached and whose fingerprints were really on it, she kept to herself. She never told a soul. Not her staff, not the press, not the man who slept beside her. Why would a woman make something out of nothing and then bury it even from her own husband? She had a reason, and keeping it would cost her more than any of them could guess. Kwame Boateng married Ada 8 years back, and in the beginning he loved her the way a drowning man loves the shore. That's the truth, and it needs saying plain, because a story where the villain was always a monster is a story that can't teach you a thing. Kwame wasn't born cruel. He was born hungry and frightened and desperate to be seen as more than he actually was. He came from a family that used to have everything and lost it all, which is a particular kind of poison to grow up inside. His people remembered being important. They talked about it at every single dinner. The house they used to own, the cars, the name that used to open doors. And Kwame spent his whole life trying to buy back a standing his grandfather had gambled away long before he was born, terrified every day that people could see straight through him to the empty place where all of it used to be. When he met Ada, she struck him as calm and warm, and, as far as he could tell, completely ordinary. A woman who managed some hotels for a living, drove a sensible car, tipped the valet too much and remembered his name, never bragged about a thing. He liked that she never once asked what he was worth because he had nothing to show her. He had no idea she already knew exactly what he wasn't and had married him anyway, hoping he might grow into something no inheritance could ever buy. But over 8 years, the old hunger clawed its way back up. His side ventures failed one after another, a restaurant that closed in a season, a nightclub that bled cash faster than he could hide it, a car lot that went under owing everyone. He borrowed to stay afloat, then he borrowed to cover the borrowing. By the night of the gala, Kwame Boateng owed a group of very impatient men more than most families earn in a lifetime of honest work, and he had run clean out of ways to pay them or hide from them. Then came Falake. Falake was the daughter of Adewale Cole, a coastal hotel developer who owned 3 tall glass towers and hated the Meridian Crown chain with the pure passion of a man who'd lost bid after bid to it and never once learned who was outbidding him. Falake found Kwame at a charity dinner, sniffed out that he was going under, and handed him a rope with a heavy knot tied at the end of it. Her father, she told him, was willing to clear every last debt Kwame owed and fold him into the Cole family business, but only if he cut loose the nobody wife who managed other people's hotels and married up into a name that actually meant something. To Kwame, it wasn't even a difficult decision. It felt like a ladder lowered into the exact pit he was dying in. He told himself Ada would land fine. She always did. He told himself she'd been dead weight on his ambitions for years anyway. A man tells himself a whole lot of comfortable things when he's already decided to be cruel and just needs to feel clean while he goes through with it. Nkechi made the whole thing easier. Kwame's sister had appointed herself the family's guard dog years ago, and she had never liked Ada. Never forgiven her for being soft-spoken instead of impressed, for treating the Boateng name like an ordinary name instead of the crown jewels the family still pretended it was. Nkechi wanted Ada gone and replaced by the flashier sister-in-law, the one with the coastal towers and the famous last name to drop at parties. So she filmed. She narrated. She turned her own brother's betrayal into content and fed it straight to a family group chat that answered every clip with laughing faces and little thumbs raised in approval. The 3 of them moved together on the night of the gala like a single machine built for one purpose: the husband who needed the rescue, the outsider who wanted the merger, the sister who wanted the show. And down beneath all of them, in a room the size of a closet, Ada finally let herself feel the whole weight of it. She didn't rage, she went numb. That's what real betrayal does to a person. It doesn't burn hot, it freezes cold. She sat very still on the edge of that folding cot, under the low hissing pipe, and stared at a water stain on the wall, and thought seriously about walking away from every bit of it, taking the cord off over her head, leaving the key on the thin pillow, vanishing into a life where nobody knew her name, and so nobody could ever use it against her again. Earlier that same afternoon, before the guests arrived, Kwame had found her in the lobby and told her flat out how the evening would go. "Do me a favor and stay out of the way tonight," he'd said, not even lowering his voice, checking his watch. "Adewale Cole's people are going to be watching. I need the room to see the man I'm about to become, not the woman I used to settle for." He'd said settle for to her face like it was a weather report, and Folake, passing behind him, had trailed one hand across his shoulders and murmured to Ada with a pitying little smile, "It's nothing personal, sweetheart. Some people are built to serve and some are built to be served. You'll be happier once you stop pretending." Ada had absorbed both blows without a word. She'd learned long ago that a person committed to seeing you small will read your silence as proof and your anger as proof too. So she gave them neither. She simply filed it away, the way she filed everything, tucked out of sight and remembered. But a woman who never fights is not the same as a woman who cannot fight. Few men ever make a graver error about the person sitting quietly across from the table from them. What none of them knew was that she had already spent weeks getting ready for this exact night. Not for revenge, she kept telling herself it wasn't revenge, and mostly she believed it. For certainty. She had watched her husband change slowly, then, all at once, and she needed to know past any doubt whether the man she'd loved was gone or just lost. So she'd gone still and paid attention, the way she'd paid attention to everything her whole life. She read the accounts. She saw the ring on a statement before it was ever on a hand. And 2 weeks before the gala, standing in the dark hallway of her own home, she'd heard the two of them on the phone in the next room, not bothering to lower their voices, because why would they? Who was going to hear? A nobody wife, asleep, they assumed. "Once the reopening's done and my father signs, she's handled. I'll put her up somewhere for the night, someplace that makes the point, and file the papers Monday. She won't fight. She never fights." And Folake had laughed, light and easy. "Poor thing, she really has no idea what's about to happen to her, does she?" Ada had absorbed both blows without a word. She'd learned long ago that a person committed to seeing you small will read your silence as proof and your anger as proof too. So she gave them neither. She simply filed it away the way she filed everything, tucked out of sight and remembered. But now, alone under the pipe, she got as far as lifting the leather cord off over her head. She held the worn metal in her open palm and looked at it for a long, long time, and she felt 19 years old again in a cold room under 3 coats. For a while she felt nothing at all, and that scared her more than crying would have. She had made something out of nothing, something bigger than anyone in that ballroom above her would ever believe, and she still could not remember the last time someone touched her face with love. A marriage that was empty so long she'd stopped noticing the echo. Down there under the hissing pipe, she asked herself the question she'd been outrunning for 2 years, whether a woman who lets herself be treated like nothing for that long has any right to be surprised when the world finally agrees. She thought about her mother's ruined knees. She thought about all those mornings folding corners, being invisible on purpose, telling herself that patience was strength and silence was dignity. And she wondered for one terrible moment if she'd only ever been teaching herself how to disappear. But then her thumb found the worn ridge of the metal in her palm, the same shape her mother's thumb had worn smooth over 40 years, and something old and stubborn straightened its back inside her. She was not disappearing. She had been waiting. There is a difference, and only she had ever known it. Then a knock came at the door. Tunde, the manager, stood out in the narrow service hall, holding a slim folder flat against his chest. He'd been searching the building for her for the better part of an hour. He looked at her face, and then at the small key resting in her hand, and he chose his words the way a man chooses his steps on thin ice. "Ma'am," he said, low and careful, "I know who you are. I've known since I pulled up your reservation at the desk." He swallowed. "The whole executive floor is upstairs asking me why the founder and owner of this entire company is booked into a maintenance room under a last name that isn't hers. They're frightened, honestly. Nobody knows what you want us to do. So I came to ask you myself." Ada raised her eyes to him. "Nothing," she said. "Not yet." She slipped the cord back over her head and let it settle against her collar once more, and something in her face shifted, not hardened exactly, settled, squared, like a woman who had just finished the last of a very long calculation and found the answer she'd been dreading and needing in equal measure. She had come to this gala tonight already knowing everything. She had come to be sure, and now she was. Midnight arrived at the Meridian Crown, and the grand ballroom glittered like the inside of a jewelry box left open on a rich woman's dresser. Kwame stood at the head table with a glass of champagne in his hand, and Falake close at his side in a gown the exact color of warm gold. He tapped the crystal with a spoon until the enormous room fell hush, until every face turned toward him, and the string quartet lowered their bows mid-phrase. Off to the side, Nkechi lifted her phone and started recording, ready to capture her brother's crowning moment for the family that so loved a good coronation. Friends, family, honored guests. Tonight is a night about new beginnings. He raised his glass towards Falake, who lowered her lashes right on cue. I want to thank the Cole family, and Mr. Adewale Cole in particular, for believing in me when others could not see my worth. Tonight I start a brand new chapter, a stronger one, and I start it beside a woman who truly understands what a name is worth in this world. The room gave him a scattering of uncertain applause. Falake beamed like a bride. Somewhere down on the coast, a developer's daughter stood one toast away from folding a rival's crown jewel into her father's portfolio. What Kwame could not see, what none of them at that glittering head table could see, was the small knot of hotel executives that had gathered at the back of the ballroom in the last 10 minutes, pale, whispering, phones pressed to their ears, talking to people far above them, and every last one of them was staring at the same set of doors, waiting the way you wait for a storm you already know you can't stop. That was the exact moment the ballroom doors opened at the far end of the hall. Ada walked in. She had not changed into diamonds. She wore the same plain dark dress she'd arrived in hours earlier, except now the leather cord rested openly against her collar, the little key hanging outside the fabric where anyone with eyes could see it. She did not hurry. She crossed that vast floor at the unbothered pace of a woman who had walked it 10,000 times before, because she had. And without understanding why they did it, the guests drew back and made a path for her all the way to the front. Kwame's smile flickered like a bulb about to go. "Ada," he said, forcing a laugh out toward the crowd, "this is a private moment for the family. I think you've gotten a little turned around on the way to your—" "Mr. Adebayo." Ada didn't say it to Kwame. She said it past him to Tunde, who had stepped in at the edge of the ballroom in his pressed jacket and now stood very straight, waiting for exactly this. "Would you tell the room what you told me downstairs tonight? Start with the reservation." Tunde's voice carried across the frozen hall, level and clear enough to reach the back wall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "on behalf of the entire staff of the Meridian Crown, it is my honor to formally welcome the founder and sole owner of this hotel and of the Meridian Crown Company. She built every property that carries our name. She holds the deed to the very ground you are all standing on tonight." He turned toward Ada and bowed his head. "Welcome home, Mrs. Okonkwo. Forgive us, we didn't know it was you." The quartet did not play. Nobody clapped. 2,000 people made the precise sound a room makes when the floor tips under it. One low collective breath pulled in all at once, and then a silence so total you could hear the ice settle in the buckets. Kwame laughed, a single ugly bark of a thing. That's insane. She manages hotels, she doesn't own." He spun towards Folake for backup. Folake was not looking at him. Folake was staring straight at Ada and doing arithmetic behind her eyes and losing every bit of color in her face. Ada stepped up onto the low dais so the whole room could see her. My mother cleaned motel rooms for 40 years. She died dreaming of a company that would treat the woman down on her knees as good as the woman up on silk. So I built it for her. I built it without my name on the door, under a company none of you ever bothered to look into, because it never once occurred to a single one of you that a soft-spoken woman might be worth looking into. She turned her eyes onto Kwame and held him there. You most of all. Ada, Kwame said. There is no deal, Kwame, she said it, gently, and the gentleness was the cruelest part of the whole night. The money Mr. Cole promised to pull you out of the hole you dug yourself into, he intended to use it to buy his way into a company that already belongs to me. There was never any merger on that table. There was only my name, and you chasing after it on your hands and knees, never once realizing it was already yours to lose. She let it settle over the room. You didn't trade a nobody for a windfall tonight. You handed a very wealthy woman the last reason she needed to finally let you go. Folake set her glass down on the table with enormous care, like a woman handling something that might go off. My father, she said, and her voice had gone thin as paper, is going to want a word with you. Your father spent 3 years trying to buy this chain and got outbid every single time. By me. He never knew it was me. He can call my office in the morning like everyone else. She looked back over at the sea of stunned faces. The penthouse on the 40th floor is no longer reserved for anyone, and the private line of credit this company quietly extended to Mr. Boateng last spring is closed, effective now. I approved that credit myself months ago, hoping against hope he would use it to climb out and become a man I could stand to stay married to. A single beat of held breath. He used it to buy her ring. I have every receipt. I have them for 2 years. And there it was, the thing that turned the whole ballroom entirely cold in an entirely different way than before. 2 years. You knew, Kwame said. Every drop of blood had drained out of his face. You knew, and you let me. I knew for 2 years. The debts, the nightclub bills with her name printed right on them, the trips you said were for work. I knew before you fully admitted it to yourself that you had already decided to leave me. And I stayed. Her hand rose to the brass at her throat, and for the first and only time that entire night, her voice cracked, one clean fault line down the middle, opened and closed in the space of a breath. I stayed because some foolish part of me still hoped the man I married might find his own way back up in this life without standing on my neck to do it. I let myself be made small so I could be certain of exactly who you were before I acted. That is 2 years of my one life that I will never get back. 2 years I paid just to be certain. Now, I'm certain. She looked at him with something that had traveled all the way past anger and come out the other side as something close to pity. Now, I'm certain. Across the ballroom, Nkechi slowly lowered her phone. For the first time in her life, she'd stopped recording on purpose, because some part of her had finally understood that this was not the kind of moment you wanted your name attached to. Near the head table, an older man in a silver tie was already on his cell, hunched and urgent, and the few guests close enough to hear caught the name Adewale and the words, "Pull the wire back, pull it back now, there's no deal." The developer who'd spent 3 years and no small amount of pride trying to buy this very company had just learned, secondhand, across a phone line, that he'd nearly wired a rescue to the one woman who'd been beating him the whole time without his knowledge. Somewhere in that room, a champagne flute slipped out of someone's fingers and shattered on the marble, and it was the loudest sound anybody had made in a full minute. Nobody even turned to look at it. Every eye in the place was fixed on the woman by the closet key husband, the woman they'd watched get sent below the pipes 6 hours before, standing on the low step with a mint still in her pocket and a company under her feet. She stepped down off the dais. Kwame moved then, fast, reaching for her arm the way a falling man grabs at anything. Ada, wait, we can fix this. Whatever you need, I'll change. I swear before God I'll change. Just don't do this to me in front of all these people. And there, for 1 second, the mask came all the way off. And what was underneath wasn't a monster at all. It was a scared boy from a family that lost everything, watching the last thing he'd mistaken for a lifeline walk away from him. That was the saddest part of the whole night. Sadder than the closet key, sadder than the penthouse. He'd spend 8 years standing next to the answer to every fear he'd ever had, and he'd never once been able to see it because he'd been too busy searching the horizon for something bigger. Ada looked down at his hand on her arm until he took it back. She didn't say anything cruel. She'd run out of the wish to hurt him somewhere in the last hour. There was only tiredness left and a strange, aching mercy. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone," she said to the room. "The bar is open all night. It's mine." And she walked out the same way she had walked in, unbothered, unhurried, in the same plain dress they had mocked her in 6 hours earlier, while 2,000 of the wealthiest people in the city watched the richest woman most of them would ever stand near leave a ballroom without raising her voice one time. Behind her, 2,000 phones came up at once. Before she even reached the lobby, the clips were already climbing. Not the one Nikechia planned to post, but 100 others, shot by strangers, of a man in a tuxedo begging his cleaning staff wife not to walk away. The story was loose in the world now, running faster than any of them could chase it. Not even Ada could call it back. And what it would do to each of them by morning, not one soul in that ballroom could yet guess. She had won. Everyone in that hall could see that she had won. And it had cost her 2 years she would never get back, and something else besides. Something she wouldn't name out loud until much later. The very last thread of hope she'd been carrying, that any of it, any single day of the 8 years, had ever been real love and not just a man reaching for a shore. That was the scar. Winning didn't close it. Winning only proved she'd been right to keep bleeding as long as she had. Karma is not a clean thing. People want it to fall like an even rain, soaking everyone who has it coming in equal measure. It doesn't work that way. It falls in patches. Some folks get drenched to the bone, some walk between the drops and stay bone dry. That's the part nobody wants to hear, so most stories lie about it. This one won't. Kwame got drenched. By the next morning, the story was everywhere, though not the version Nkechi had spent all night planning to post. The debts he'd buried came due inside of a week, and with no coal money to catch him and no wife's name left to borrow against, there was nothing beneath him but the ground. The impatient men he owed did not care about his feelings or his family name. He lost the leased cars, the condo that was never really his, the watches he'd never actually finished paying for. Adewale Cole, humiliated in front of the entire industry for very nearly bankrolling a scheme to buy a company his own daughter's boyfriend was too foolish to identify, just severed every connection to the Boda name within a day. And so Kwame Boateng, who had spent his whole life in mortal terror of being seen as poor, became exactly that. Poor and public, and with the largest audience of his life watching him fall.
Folake got wet too, though not soaked. Her father laid the whole embarrassment squarely at her feet, for reaching after a married man tangled up in debt, for toasting to a merger without ever once checking whose name sat on the deed. He pulled her out of the family business and shipped her overseas to, in his words, learn some discretion. She'll land on her feet in the end, the way people with 3 towers behind them nearly always do. But her father's door had closed hard on her fingers, and it left a mark she'd feel for years. And Nkechi? Nkechi walked. That's the part that isn't fair, and this story is not going to pretend that it is. The sister who filmed every second of it, who turned her brother's cruelty into a show, who sent a woman's worst night straight to a group chat full of laughing faces. She deleted the footage before the sun even came up. She scrubbed her accounts clean, and then she reinvented herself whole, the way certain people always seem to manage. Inside of a month, she was telling anyone who'd sit still that she had never once approved of the way her brother treated Ada, that she'd always sensed Ada was someone special, that she'd tried and tried to warn the family, and nobody would listen. She kept just enough of the borrowed Boateng shine to stay in the rooms she liked to be seen standing in. She paid almost nothing for any of it. Some people never do. Pretending otherwise would be a fairy tale, and Ada was done with those. And Kwame landed one last blow of his own on the way down, because a cornered man always has one swing left in him. He couldn't touch her money, so he reached for the only thing of hers he could still get his hands around, the story of who she was underneath. He gave interviews to anyone with a camera. He called her cold, calculating, heartless. A woman who watched her own husband suffer for 2 years and did nothing, he told them, wounded and convincing. Who built an empire and hid it from her family like a spider in a web. Who let me humiliate myself in public just to make a point. You tell me what kind of person does something like that. And here is the cruel truth of it. Some people believed him. Because a woman who can hold her tongue for 2 years is a terribly easy woman to paint as a monster. Her patience, the very thing that had shielded her all that time, got turned around in his hands and used as the proof against her heart. There were people, strangers mostly, but a few who really should have known better, who decided Ada was a hard and scheming thing who'd baited a trap and watched a man walk into it. She read some of what they said, and it cut her deeper than the little sub-level key ever had. Being sent below the pipes had only insulted her body. This insulted the one thing her mother had handed down to her that she truly believed no one alive could take away. Her goodness. The belief that she was, underneath everything, a person who left every room better than she found it. But she didn't answer a word of it. She understood for a long time that you cannot win an argument about the shape of your own heart with people who have already made up their minds to misread it. So she let them talk themselves hoarse. She walked away with her name, her company, her mother's brass, and a wound the victory had come nowhere close to healing. The morning after the gala, she walked into her own company for the first time as a face people could see. The boardroom went silent when she entered. 12 executives who had spent years taking orders from memos signed with a name they'd never connected to a person, now realizing the person had been standing among them all along, unseen, checking whether they treated the housekeeping staff as well as the shareholders. Most of them had. A couple of them, it turned out, had not, and those two cleared their desks by the end of the week. She promoted Tunde that same morning, the manager who kept a strange promise to a stranger and then found the courage to cross a ballroom and speak the truth into a microphone with 2,000 rich people staring at him. She made him a regional director. When he tried to thank her, she stopped him. You didn't do it for me. You did it because it was right, when you still thought I was nobody who could reward you for it. That's the only reason I trust you now. He never forgot that either. That's what a real ending looks like. Not a clean sweep with the villains all lined up and punished in a row. A woman standing upright, whole, vindicated, and still quietly bleeding, walking out of a door while the world behind her argues about whether she ever deserved to. 2 years after that night, on the forgotten side of Atlanta, a small brick building reopened its doors with almost no announcement at all. It used to be a weekly rental hotel,
The kind of low, tired place the world drives straight past. Ada had bought it and poured a fortune most people couldn't picture into a place that would never earn back a dime, restoring it not into a glittering resort, but into something stranger and better. A working hotel, clean and warm, and cheap enough that ordinary people could stay in it, staffed entirely by the people nobody else would hire. Women out of shelters, men home from prison, single mothers who needed work that respected the shape of their days. She named it after her mother. She called it the Ifua. She ran the front of it 2 days out of every week. The other 5, she ran the largest hotel company in the nation out of a modest corner office, with her mother's worn key sitting in a small glass frame now on the corner of her desk, now off the cord at last, out from under her collar, finally set down and at rest after 24 years against her skin. She never did remarry. When a friend gently asked why, she said she wasn't closed to it, only careful. She'd spent her whole life studying how a person leaves a room, and she'd wait for a man who left every one a little better than he found it, or wait forever and be at peace either way. The wound was still in there, but a wound and a deep peace can live in the same person at the same time. That's the part nobody tells you when you're young and bleeding and sure it will never stop. She did remember the Mint. The week before the Ifua opened, Ada tracked down a 60-year-old housekeeper from the flagship, a woman named Ola, who'd once stopped on a stairwell to make sure a stranger in a nice dress wasn't lost, and who'd handed that stranger a peppermint without ever knowing her name. Ada offered her the job of head of housekeeping at the new hotel, her own office, a say in how every room got run, and real respect for the first time in her long working life. Ola cried at the desk and asked over and over why her. Ada only said, "Because you were kind to me one time when you thought I was nobody, and I've spent my whole life learning that's the only test that ever really tells you the truth about a person." She never explained the stairwell. She didn't need to. Ola took the job, and she still keeps peppermints in her apron to this day, and she hands them out to every nervous new hire on their first morning, though she couldn't tell you exactly why the habit means so much to the boss. On the morning the Ifua first opened its doors, a young woman started her very first shift on the housekeeping staff. She was 19, nervous, fresh out of a hard year, gripping the handle of a cleaning cart she didn't quite know how to steer yet. Ada watched her from across the small, bright lobby for a while, saying nothing, remembering. Then she walked over, and she reached into her pocket and took out a small brass key, a brand new one, cut fresh that very week, and she pressed it into the girl's hand and folded the trembling fingers closed over it, exactly the way a dying woman had for her once in a crowded hospital ward. "That opens room 1, the first room you'll ever clean in this house. Keep it on you. It's the one thing in this whole business that nobody can ever take off you." She held the girl's frightened eyes with her own. "And you clean that room like somebody you love is going to lay their head down in it tonight, because in this house, somebody always is." The girl didn't understand yet. One day she would. Ada straightened up and looked around the small, warm lobby she had built out of nothing but the memory of a woman who scrubbed floors on ruined knees. For one full moment, she let herself feel all of it at once. The loss, the lie, the 2 stolen years, the scar that never fully closed, and the hard-won steadiness of standing at last in the exact place she had always been meant to stand. Here is the one thing worth taking with you tonight. The people who measure your worth by the room they stick you in have already told you everything you will ever need to know about them. And a person's dignity, carried close through every room the world insists is beneath them, is not weakness. It is a foundation. You can build a whole house on top of it. She had. Then she rolled up her sleeves and went back to work. If she made you feel something tonight, do one thing for her. Leave one word down in the comments for every woman who was ever put near the mops and still built the whole house anyway. Subscribe and stay for the next one, because the softest ones always have the story you'll never see coming.